Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be tackling this recent outbreak of violence in Syria, and we've got a whole stack of news reports from a bunch of different sources. And to be honest, the situation looks really messy. It seems like just when the country was sort of getting over the Assad regime being overthrown, things have become even more complicated.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that, regime change isn't just like flipping a switch, right?
Yeah.
The new government is Islamist, led by Ahmed al-Sharaa, and they're facing some pretty serious pushback.
So the news is just full of reports about clashes and revenge killings, and it sounds like hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 people have died. So what was it that actually kicked all of this off?
Yeah, it seems like the snark was this ambush on government security forces. And this happened near a place called Jableh, which is in Latakia province. And most of the reports, places like The Guardian and CBN, they all seem to be pointing to remnants of Assad's regime, people still loyal to the old way as the ones behind this ambush.
Okay, so even though Assad is gone, his supporters are still a force to be reckoned with. Huh. That's definitely adding fuel to what was already a pretty tense situation.
Exactly. And, Syria has some really deep sectarian divisions. And the Alawite community, which is the group that Assad belonged to, they're feeling incredibly vulnerable right now. And ABC News even has reports of violence against them, going back, further, even before all of this recent fighting.
So you've got this backdrop of, unrest, and then this ambush near Jableh is like lighting a match to a powder keg. And it sounds like things escalated pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The fighting is mostly concentrated in the coastal areas, the provinces of Latakia and Tartus. And the reports coming out of there are just grim. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is estimating over 1,000 people dead.
1,000? Wow, that's just a staggering number.
It really is. And it's not just statistics either. Some of these reports include firsthand accounts from people who actually witnessed this violence.
Yeah, that's what always gets me the most.
Like, for example, the New York Times tells this story of a woman in Al-Haifa who was watching her neighbors run from their home, still in their pajamas, only to be gunned down in the street.
Oh, my gosh.
CBN has reports of homes being looted and burned, bodies just left out on the streets.
It's just hard to imagine the terror.
And MSNBC is even going so far as to say that this is the worst violence Syria has seen since Assad was removed from power. I mean, this level of violence is a huge challenge for this new government.
Okay, so we've got this new government headed by Ahmed al-Sharaa. Now, I know you mentioned he's an Islamist leader, but what's his background? What do we know about him?
Well, he's associated with this group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS for short. And that connection raises some eyebrows, to say the least.
How so?
Well, because the U.S. has officially labeled HTS as a terrorist organization. However, you've got Canada acknowledging that they've supposedly broken ties with al-Qaeda.
So on the one hand, you have this potentially dangerous group, but on the other, you've got a group trying to distance themselves from their past and, trying to assert their authority as the legitimate government.
That's exactly the tightrope that al-Sharaa is walking. You see it in all of his public statements. Several sources have quoted him calling for peace and promising to hold those responsible for the violence accountable. But the question is, can he actually deliver on those promises?
And are his forces involved in any of these killings? I mean, because that would completely undermine any message of peace.
It's a very valid question.
Okay, so we've talked about the Assad loyalists and the new government. Are there any other players involved in this conflict? I mean, it already seems so complicated, but are there any other groups or factions that we need to know about?
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely other groups to consider. You know how I mentioned the Alawite community feeling vulnerable? Well, Haaretz actually published a letter from a Syrian citizen who's describing the situation as a potential Holocaust for their people. I mean, that sense of fear and desperation could easily push some towards more extreme groups or actions.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to think of people feeling that terrified.
Absolutely. Yep. And when fear takes over, it's hard to predict what will happen. And then on top of that, you've got to factor in groups like those mentioned by Formiche, Islamist groups with potentially even more radical agendas than al-Sharaa's government. I mean, they could really exploit this chaos and gain a foothold.
So you could have various Islamist groups vying for power, Assad loyalists fighting for their survival, and all of this is playing out against this backdrop of deep-seated sectarian tensions. I mean, it's like a perfect storm.
It really is. Yeah. And, we can't forget about the potential role of international actors either. I mean, we touched on it earlier with Russia and Iran possibly supporting Assad loyalists, but it's a much bigger picture than that. Think about it. A destabilized Syria has implications for the whole region. I mean, global news really emphasizes that point.
Right, because instability in one country rarely stays contained.
Exactly. It can easily spill over into neighboring countries, further inflaming existing tensions, and, like global news suggests, creating a breeding ground for extremism.
Oh, on a regional level, things could get a lot worse. And speaking of making things worse, I mean, we can't ignore how the international community is responding to all of this.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, really.
Yeah.
You have the U.S., as reported by multiple sources, condemning the violence and calling for accountability.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this other side to it. ABC News and France 24 both talked about a meeting in Amman where foreign ministers actually called for lifting sanctions on Syria.
So it seems like there's this tug of war going on between wanting to hold this new government accountable and then needing to address the very real humanitarian crisis that's unfolding right now.
Precisely. It's a complex dilemma with no easy answers.
Okay, so we've laid out this incredibly complex situation. You know, we've got these internal factions with conflicting interests, potential foreign interference, and just a whole lot of uncertainty. What does all of this mean for the future of Syria? I mean, is there any hope for peace and stability?
Well, CBN called this violence a major challenge for the new government. And it's hard to disagree with that assessment. But it's also important to remember that we're talking about a country that's already been through years of brutal conflict. I mean, they've just emerged from a devastating war. Their economy is in shambles, and now they're facing this fresh wave of violence.
It's just hard to fathom how much the Syrian people have endured.
It's truly tragic. But despite all of this, I think it's important to avoid these simplistic narratives.
Yeah.
This isn't just a case of good versus evil or a straightforward clash between, Islamists and secularists. It's a really complex web of grievances, competing interests, and historical baggage.
So where do we even begin to untangle all of this?
I think the first step is recognizing that there are no easy answers. We need to approach this with nuance and a deep understanding of the historical and social context.
And with empathy for the Syrian people.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the political analysis and the geopolitical chess game, but we can't lose sight of the human cost of this conflict.
It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines and forget that these are real people whose lives are being torn apart by this violence.
And that's why those firsthand accounts in our sources are so powerful. They remind us that we're not just talking about abstract concepts or political ideologies. We're talking about people losing their homes, their families, their lives.
It's a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the really devastating consequences of conflict.
Exactly.
So given all of this, what are some potential scenarios for Syria's future? I mean, is there any realistic path towards stability and reconciliation?
Well, let's explore some possibilities. One outcome is that al-Sharaa manages to consolidate his power, restore order, and establish a functioning government. He's already made promises of accountability, and there are reports of his security forces pushing back against Assad loyalists.
So a strong, centralized government could bring about some stability.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But even if al-Sharaa succeeds in quelling the violence, the underlying issues of sectarianism, political instability, and economic hardship are all still going to remain.
Yeah.
And those are deeply entrenched problems.
And there's always the possibility that things could spiral even further out of control.
Absolutely. We could see an escalation of sectarian violence, a full-blown civil war, even more devastating than the one that just ended.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is. And it's not just a hypothetical scenario. I mean, we're already seeing signs of revenge killings targeting the Alawite community.
Yeah.
And if that cycle of violence continues, it could be catastrophic.
And then you have the wild card of foreign intervention. I mean, we've talked about Russia and Iran, but could other countries get involved?
It's definitely a possibility. And if that happens, we could see a proxy war playing out in Syria with various international powers backing different factions.
That would be a nightmare scenario.
It would.
Yeah.
And it would make any hopes of a peaceful resolution even more distant.
So it seems like Syria is at a crossroads.
It is. And the choices made by Syrian leaders, both within the government and among the various factions, will have profound consequences for the future of their country and the entire region.
It's a heavy burden to bear.
It really is.
But amidst all of this uncertainty, are there any glimmers of hope? I mean, are there any signs that a better future is possible for Syria?
I think there are. It's easy to get overwhelmed by just the sheer scale of the challenges here. But I think it's important to remember that even in the darkest of times, human resilience can shine through.
That's true. I mean, the Syrian people have already endured so much.
They really have. And that resilience gives me hope. Despite, the years of conflict and this current wave of violence, there are still people working tirelessly to build a better future for Syria.
Who are these people? What are they doing?
I mean, think about the activists. the humanitarians, the ordinary citizens who are risking their lives to help others to document the truth, to, plant those seeds of peace.
It's inspiring to think about, those individuals making a difference, even in the middle of all this chaos.
It really is.
Yeah.
And their efforts, however small they may seem, they deserve our attention and our support.
So what can be done to support those efforts? I mean, what role should the international community play in all of this?
What's clear that the international community can't just stand on the sidelines and issue condemnations. There needs to be a concerted effort to support a credible process for transitional justice, for reconciliation, for rebuilding a society that's been shattered by years of war and division.
But how do you even begin to rebuild a country that's been so deeply fractured?
It's a monumental task.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. And it won't be easy. It'll require addressing not just the physical damage, but also the deep psychological wounds that have been inflicted by years of conflict. It'll require creating opportunities for economic recovery, for education, for, a sense of hope and a path forward.
You mentioned transitional justice. I mean, we've seen reports of horrific atrocities committed by various groups. Can there be any hope for reconciliation and healing without addressing those crimes?
That's a crucial question. Accountability is essential for any lasting peace. The international community needs to support efforts to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable, regardless of their affiliation.
But given the complex web of actors and allegiances in this conflict, how do you even begin to untangle responsibility?
It's daunting, no doubt. You have Assad loyalists potentially backed by foreign powers operating outside the control of the new government. You have accusations of human rights abuses by both sides. Unraveling all of this and establishing a credible process for justice will require a huge commitment from both internal and external actors.
So it sounds like the new Syrian government will have to demonstrate a genuine willingness to address past wrongs.
Absolutely. They need to make sure that all communities feel safe and protected, regardless of their religious or political affiliation.
It feels like there are just so many what-ifs surrounding Syria's future. What if al-Sharaa can't maintain control? What if the violence spreads? What if international actors choose to escalate their involvement?
Yeah, those are all very valid concerns. And as we've seen from the sources we've examined, there are many different perspectives on what the future holds for Syria. Some are cautiously optimistic, pointing to al-Sharaa's calls for peace and the potential for international support. Others are far more pessimistic, warning of the dangers of escalating violence and foreign interference.
So where do we go from here? How do we make sense of all this information and figure out what it means for the Syrian people who have already been through so much?
I think it starts with recognizing the complexity of the situation. We can't oversimplify this conflict or reduce it to easy answers. We need to be mindful of the nuances, the historical context, and the human cost.
And we need to stay informed.
Absolutely. Staying informed and engaged is crucial. But it's also important to remember that this isn't just about geopolitics or abstract political theories. This is about the lives of real people, millions of them caught in the crossfire of this conflict. We need to listen to their voices, understand their experiences, and approach the situation with empathy and compassion.
That's a powerful reminder. And those firsthand accounts we've discussed, those stories of resilience and hope, they really underscore the human dimension of this tragedy.
They do, and they remind us that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, a brighter future is possible.
It's a long game, though. It's not something that will be resolved overnight.
You're right. It will require patience, persistence, and a belief that change is possible even in the most challenging of circumstances. And it will require us to recognize that even the smallest acts of courage and kindness can make a difference.
That's a really important point. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problems in Syria, but your words remind us that we can all play a part, however small, in supporting peace and justice.
Exactly. And I think that's what I want to leave our listeners with today. As you continue to follow the developments in Syria, remember the human faces behind the headlines. Don't lose sight of the complexity, the nuance, the need for both accountability and compassion. And most importantly, don't give up hope.
Those are wise words. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the ongoing unrest in Syria. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I know it's a lot to process. We encourage you to explore the sources we've provided, to delve deeper into the issues, and to form your own conclusions.
Because ultimately, staying informed, engaged, and compassionate is the best way to honor the struggles of the Syrian people and to contribute to a more peaceful and just world.
Thank you for guiding us through this complex topic. It's been an eye-opening conversation.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, even in the face of adversity, hope is a powerful force.